Hi everyone, good evening. A warm welcome to this program, Shaping the Future of AI. This episode is the third in a session of this new series called Designing Technology for All. And as we are all thinking about all the time, of course, AI, artificial intelligence, big data, big tech, they're more and more shaping our reality, and questions of fairness and inclusivity and ethics are at the forefront of our minds. And that's the themes we're exploring in this series. And we're super excited to have kicked off this series, the first 3 episodes, with FemData. Wonderful collaboration, and our aim so far was to unpack the hidden biases in data, in AI, to interrogate the power dynamics behind AI systems, and to explore how to shape the future of it in a more inclusive way. So happy that you are here today with us. My name is Lindsay Veda. I'm also curious about all your names and how you're doing today. Everyone okay? Yes. Okay, great. Happy that you're here. In this program, I'm not by myself, luckily. We have wonderful speakers with us that I'm going to introduce in a second. Monique Steins, Naomi Appelman, Gabriel Pereira. Really happy to have this conversation with these specific people. And we will examine specifically how to involve citizens in shaping the future of AI. So why we need to do that, and also how we might be able to do that. What are the tools? What are some of the strategies to do that? We're welcoming you all here, but we're also very happy to welcome people watching from home or from where you are. Thank you for joining. And we have a little tool, Mentimeter, that can involve everyone, both you here and people watching at home. If you have any questions or any remarks, you can go to menti.com and you can use the code 41023308, and we'll make sure that your question ends up in our conversation as well, that we're weaving together tonight. Okay, we ready? Yes. Woo, nice. I like the enthusiasm. So FemData was founded by 2 people, Paulina van Stakkelberg and Meerte Blusser, and Paulina is here with us tonight. Give her a warm hand. Hi, Paulina.
Hi.
How are you doing?
Very, very good. I'm very excited for the session.
Super nice. Yeah. So you and Meerte are both PhD candidates in the fields of consumer psychology, data science, and based on your backgrounds, you have founded FemData. Can you just tell us a little bit about FemData, but specifically in the context of tonight as well, how to include people in the future of AI?
Yeah. So unfortunately, Meerte can't be here tonight because she's sick. So I'm just going to be speaking for the both of us.
Yeah, I hope she's watching. Hi, Meerte.
But essentially, the background story is that we started FemData because we saw that even though data applications really affect everyone because we're so surrounded by technology in our daily lives, there's really very little attention paid in technical environments to how social inequalities can actually trickle down into the data applications. And we also noticed how there's often very little interaction between different fields that are working on this issue. So when we founded FemData, our main aim was to create awareness. So we started organizing, for instance, talks. We're also planning on organizing workshops, these kinds of things. But a secondary aim is also to bring together these different perspectives from different fields, because what we really noticed is that currently there is a general trend to collect more and more data and to start throwing AI models at it, but there is very little understanding about what the data actually means. And if you really want to get to the core of bias, you really need to look at it from a historical, sociological, political perspective. And we just felt like that's currently lacking.
Yeah, definitely. And this is the 3rd episode.
Yes.
You've had 2 already. Were people there for the first 2? Who was there? Okay, almost nobody. So maybe you can, which is great actually, because you can tell us what are some of the key eureka points that you want everyone to know about.
Yeah, so obviously there were super many really interesting points. We also had really, really great speakers who are experts in their respective fields, and we really had different backgrounds. But I'm not going to go like into all of the points, obviously, because I think then I take up too much space. So I'm just going to summarize a few of my personal main takeaways. So in the first episode, we looked mainly into, okay, what is data bias? What does it mean from the perspective of different fields? And for me, a really interesting point was, for instance, when we talked about large language models and how the fact that they're really Anglocentric can actually negatively affect communities that do not have this as a main language, so how it like trickles down over time. And another point that was really interesting, for instance, from my personal work, because I work on prediction modeling and monitoring and these kinds of topics in my PhD, was that there's currently very little active involvement of vulnerable target groups in medical app development. And this is really a huge issue because that's also an application that's getting bigger and bigger and bigger because there's more and more data collected about your medical status. And if you place this in the context of some political developments, then we really need to start talking about this topic a lot more. So I would say that was my main takeaway from the first session. And then in the second session, we focused a lot more on politics. And what I found really interesting and relevant there, and also I could also link that back to the whole medical app thing, but it could also be that that's just my personal interest, is that one of the speakers really emphasized, okay, we are trying to regulate these technologies, but for instance, one of the limitations that we're currently facing is that we're so dependent on systems that are mainly developed by foreign tech companies like Microsoft, for instance. So it's really hard to do these things when you know that a lot of the software that you use in daily life is actually not really under our control, and that this is really a huge issue, and that we really need to start rethinking how we want to structure our digital infrastructure, how we want to organize this in the future, because this is already turning into an issue with what we see what's going on in the world. So that's something that really, really stuck with me, that I also really started thinking about afterwards.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that great recap of like 3 hours of talking. And what about tonight? For tonight, what are you hoping for?
Yeah, so what I'm hoping for tonight is that, so in the first session, as I said, we looked more into, okay, what is data bias, how does it look for different fields? In the second session, we looked into the politics. And now for the third session, I really hope that we get a bit more of a glimpse into like what kinds of activism opportunities are there for people. So if you, for instance, say, okay, I'm really interested in this topic, I really want to get involved, or maybe something happened to you in your personal life or in the life of somebody you loved, who was discriminated against by like a system that was created. What can I do? How can I defend myself? How can I engage with these topics? I hope that it might,
empower us in a certain way.
Empower people and inspire people, and just give people a bit of an overview of what the opportunities are.
Yeah.
And also how multifaceted the things are, so you don't have to be a lawyer to get involved with these topics.
Yeah,
There's also other ways.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Paulina. Warm applause for you, especially for bringing us all together here tonight. I'm just curious, who here in the audience is like a total AI expert? What's our car? No one dares say. I guess it's kind of almost impossible to really be an expert with all the fast developments. But who is just interested in AI as a topic? Yeah. Okay. All right. Great. Me too. So let's introduce you properly and pull you into the conversation. Just to say your names, Monique Stein, sitting here next to me, founder of the People's AI Agency.
AI agency.
Yeah, nice wordplay. Next to you is Gabrielle Pereira, assistant professor in AI and digital culture at the University of Amsterdam. And then we have Naomi Appelman, who is an interdisciplinary researcher and social advocate for sure. And just to get to know you, all of you, a little bit more, start with you, Naomi. You recently finished your PhD, I think December last year, at the University of Amsterdam, and you co-founded the Racism and Technology Center. Can you just tell us a little bit about that center's mission, background? What is it about?
Yeah, so the Racism and Technology Center is a very small non-profit organization founded in 2020, and it's run by Jill Toh, Hans Zwart, Robin Pokorny, who is right here, and myself. And what we try to do is use technology as more of a lens or a mirror to understand and make visible racist practices in Dutch society. So the goal isn't to create anti-racist technologies, or even specifically to fight racist technologies, but really more broadly to support anti-racist struggle and dismantle structures of oppression in a larger way. And we really saw the need for this organization for several reasons already back in 2020. And I think those have already only grown. On the one hand, you have the political situation increasing, the growth of the extreme right, together with increased use of these systems, which to me really signal that we need to focus more and more on how these systems can feed, facilitate, and exacerbate forms of oppression.
Yeah.
And on the other hand, we are in a field of digital rights, which is traditionally very focused on freedom of expression and privacy, and it's very white and male traditionally, and that's opening up. But we very strongly felt that it's necessary to have more voices doing this work, and also more voices doing it locally grounded. So we really also wanted to focus on the Netherlands and what is happening here, and what our cultural context looks like, and how that's different from other contexts, and we can learn from that.
Yeah, so interesting. We're going to hear more about it, of course, in a bit. Monique, we're just going to skip you for a second. Gabriel.
As you should.
No, I'm just curious. You're a lawyer by training. You've worked across so many different contexts, human rights, tech, bridging like different worlds there. Can you tell us a little bit more about that, how that path has like unfolded from being a human rights specialist to now being an AI agency founder?
So I haven't always been like a human rights and technology lawyer, because actually I have a very atypical career path. I started as an intellectual property lawyer, working for organizations or big commercial companies like Orangina and Schweppes, and basically protecting their trademarks and their designs, with these big enterprises.
Proper lawyer, old school.
Intellectual property lawyer. And then from there, via working at the Court of Appeal here in Amsterdam, I got into the RIVM, which is the Dutch, the National Institute for Public Health and the Environment. And also there I was working on intellectual property. And from there on, I make the jump to working in the Human Rights Department of the Ministry of the Interior and Kingdom relationships. And there I worked mainly on privacy. And then already quickly, the whole digital space came to the front, because everything started to everybody was like, okay, we have to do everything online. And then, of course, there's a lot of rights that are included in there. So we started looking at that. And also when I was working at the department, I got introduced with, which is called the NJCM, which is the Dutch Committee for Jurists on Human Rights. And basically one of my first actions there was to organize a seminar on big data. And I think it was also Google Forget Me Not. So that was quite interesting, and this is a little bit the way I got into working also in technology. And then I made a shift to work with the WRR, which is the Scientific Council for Government Policy. And there we worked on an advice for the government on how to deal with AI in the coming years.
Yeah.
So this was, mainly the way that I got into
Sounds
much
quite
more
natural,
in depth.
Actually. Yeah. Interesting. Such a rich background. Yeah. Thanks for sharing. Gabrielle, last but definitely not least, you're a researcher, you're academic, but you also are an organizer. You have creative projects that you're involved in. And can you tell us a little bit more about that last part, like how you merge art into your academic practice?
For sure. So a lot of my research is really founded on the idea of practice. So not just writing about things or thinking about things very deeply, but actually creating things in this way. So a lot of this research goes through making. So we actually make things to learn about AI. And this serves both as a way to understand how AI works and how it could be otherwise, which is a central part of this, but also as a way to create things that we can talk with people. So the process of making things helps us to understand the things we're making. So in my practice, I've worked a lot with museums and cultural spaces because those are laboratories in a way, right? They're spaces that have been historically legitimized. So we've always given them the power to imagine how things could be otherwise. So I've done a lot of those projects that then collaborate with all kinds of different people, from citizens to computer scientists to other artists, to try to think about how we could do AI differently.
Yeah.
And I think there are a lot of things to think about from there, right? Because in this process of making things and thinking about them, sometimes we learn more about the assumptions and values that drive the making of things as they are. But importantly, it also points at how those assumptions and values could be different.
Yeah, I love that. Indeed, art, creative practice as a space to think as well.
Yeah, a laboratory.
Yeah, laboratory. Yeah, super cool. All right. So as I said, we're going to have this conversation in several parts. We'll also invite your questions in between. But this first part is really about why do we need citizen participation in the shaping of AI? And first, we would love for you to get the Menti out. So both you here and the people at home, you can go to menti.com and put in this code 41023308. And then the questions will appear both here and on your screen. I think everyone almost has it. The first question is a very simple one, just to test the waters. And that's whether you think we need citizen participation in AI development. Yes or no? Is everyone able to see the question? Oh, great, fantastic. We're skipping the first one. This is even better, indeed. Then we can see if we need to have this conversation at all. Maybe we have all the answers already. Why do we need citizen participation in AI development? And I like how you're using very concise words to describe it. Inclusivity is a very popular one. Democracy, accessibility, justice and transparency, have more perspectives. Yeah, build trust, pressure politics, interesting. Autonomy is something that Paulina just touched upon, actually. Yeah, thank you for sharing. So this first part of the conversation, we're going to dive into more of what's behind this. Why do we really want to increase citizen participation? And one important concept that I don't really see here yet is the idea of decolonization. So decolonizing tech, decolonizing AI. And I'm curious what that brings up for our speakers. So if we talk about decolonizing technology, what does that mean to you in your work? Maybe we can start. Well, whoever is ready to start. Naomi?
Yeah? Sure. Well, for me, first of all, decolonization is fundamentally not a technology thing. Mm-hmm. To me, it's about challenging white supremacy, challenging neocolonial relationships, capitalist exploitation, like that. That's the big things we're talking about. Yeah. And decolonized technology for me is more the consequence of a liberatory politics and the other way around. That's not to say that I don't think that there's a lot of amazing work being done specifically on this theme of making this connection between decolonization and technology. I think you can also speak to after me. But I also think it's important to have a bit of caution when we talk about decolonization, because I think there's also been, especially in the academic context, a bit of a hype around it, of using decolonization as a buzzword of legitimizing basically keeping the institutions the way they are and not actually having to do any work, because you just give some money to a project with this word and then you're done. And I think that that's happening all around us. And very clearly, the UvA, for example, had last year appointed a research priority area focus on decolonization. So I think, okay, university-wide, massive projects, a lot of money. And at the same time, they signed contracts with Microsoft to power the entire digital infrastructure of the university. And Microsoft is called by the BDS website the most complicit tech company in Israel's apartheid regime and ongoing genocide. So for me, decolonization is first and foremost a verb, not a nice abstract thing, but something you have to do, and something that I think is often talked about but not done.
Yeah. Gabrielle, Monique, would you like to respond?
Yeah, so for me, decolonization is very personal, because I think we've seen a lot of scandals going on with technology, and usually it's like certain groups who are being harmed, like we already talked about that also the weeks before, but people of color, the LGBT community, people with low income. So for me, it has this colonial feeling over it, and it's basically also like who does have access to technology. But I see this certain pattern of data of people being stolen and abused. People being excluded from technology or the way that we make technology. And then basically in the West, we're making all these kinds of decisions on how this technology should be. And so for me, I see a certain pattern. And I do think we need to break that pattern. So that would mean, for example, to make sure that especially these people that are harmed are into the digital rights field, and not only, as we sometimes call it, like white dudes who know lots about tech, but especially these people who do feel how it is to be excluded by tech, or that the data is being used in ways that should not be used, and even to take it more to the global south, or maybe I should call it the majority world. Here also we see that there's people in the African continent who are basically doing the AI work behind the screens, and then in the West we have all the benefits from these people doing these hard labor for really a little money.
Because what are they doing, just to enlighten us?
Sorry?
What are they doing?
So, for example, there's a lot of what we call, I call them tech workers. But like we had this scandal, I think it was with OpenAI, the ChatGPT. And basically these people in Kenya, I don't know how much money they got, but I can say it was in cents. And this is like $1 billion company, and basically taking advantage, I think, of people in the African continent doing the work of constantly typing in, is this a horse? Is this a pig? Is this whatever? Or even being exposed to really awful images. Yeah. So I do think there's a colonial effect to the way that we use technology in this time.
Yeah, very direct and very literal, actually. Yeah. Gabrielle?
Yeah, 100% concur with your colleagues here. So we have published together with the Terra Común Network this book. It's called Resisting Data Colonialism, a Practical Intervention. And it's open access online if anyone is interested more in this topic. It offers one perspective on how to understand what we call data colonialism. But once again, there are many different people who are writing about this in different terms. But I think what's really central in the book is that it's a book organized by a network of different activists, scholars, people who are thinking about this in Latin America for the most part, or from a Latin American way of thinking. And really tries to understand this idea of data colonialism from the ideas that are really important for all of us. And I could see in some of the answers that you had about justice, about safety, about trust, but thinking importantly about questions of race, gender, sexuality, and other questions, and how that gets to be tied in to the what we call data colonialism, or the ways that there are continuities between historical regimes of coloniality and our relations with data today. What's really important, this is, I think, the central part of this book, the part that I like the most is one of the people who helped organize it, is that on the end of the book, the second half of the book, there are 9 stories of resistance. So those are stories told by activists or scholars or people who are working together with people on the ground that talk about how people are resisting this data colonialism, or once again, however you want to call it. There's people who call it digital colonialism, for example. And I think that's really central, because if we are identifying those harms, I think it's really important to also identify how are people also fighting back against those regimes. And the book is really intended as this tool, that you can go and read and think more about how to resist.
Can you give one of your favorite examples of people?
Right, for example, in relation
stories?
to workers, there's quite a few stories about workers that Monique was talking about how workers in Latin America and other places are exploited by AI and data companies, but also about how they fight back, or the ways that they find to push back against those forms of data exploitation, for example.
Yeah. Naomi, you also did work on this in one of your projects. I know you examined different practices of resistance, the same word, in this case against algorithm content moderation. And you also argued that the Digital Services Act kind of shrinks space for resistance, actually, which is also a problem. Can you explain that?
Yeah, so the Digital Services Act is the main EU law aimed at regulating the big platforms. And then here we're speaking specifically about the big social media platforms that we all know and most of us use, even though we might perhaps not want to. And these platforms are clearly, the companies behind them are clearly in a massive position of control over the information share online, what we see and how we participate in that sphere. And what the Digital Services Act tries to do is to limit that power, or to put some boundaries to that power by instilling mainly due process norms, which is basically saying do whatever you're doing, but just make sure that you have some proper procedures in place. And why I think that is problematic, or not necessarily what we need. I mean, there's good parts about it. It's not all bad, but I just don't think it's the solution we should be pursuing, is because it firstly really legitimizes these actors as now being legally sanctioned as the rightful actors to make these decisions and to control this flow of information. And the way they do that through these procedural norms is also really saying, oh, you have free reign in substantively deciding how you do it. So you are a for-profit company. So just follow your political economic imperatives, do whatever you want that is best for you as a business to control our flow of information. And that means that the people who are in the minority, who are trying to fight back in certain ways, trying to resist, draw the shortest straw. And I think just to make it, because it is all quite abstract, right? A very clear example that always, just to me, really brings it home was for another project I did, interviewing a lot of activists, and I was speaking to a Polish pro-abortion activist whose organization kept being shadow banned, removed, censored on these platforms. Not because they did or anything that was against the platform norms or what they were doing was actually illegal as such, but really because the topic is just too politically sensitive. And if you let a company like this make their own calculation, they're going to be like, better safe than sorry, and I'm going to try and avoid this sensitive, problematic topic. And if that means that one small little organization gets erroneously removed every 2 days, that's a risk we as the company are willing to take. So that to me is how this approach that disregards the political economic power of these companies is just insufficient.
Yeah, it doesn't actually tackle the root cause of why capitalist motives actually take over. Yeah, information flows. Yeah, interesting. And also nice to dive into your report a bit more, Monique, that you wrote, because this is also about kind of organizing counter power, right? To like the big players in the field. So you conducted research for the Wetenschappelijke Raad voor de Regeringsbeleid, like what's that? Scientific Council for Government Policy. Oh, great! Quite an extensive report about. No, you tell us, what was it about, and why did you write it?
If you think this was extensive, you should have seen the other one, which was like 500 page, which we made with VAR, we made for the government on AI. I was just talking about that. But in the slipstream of this project, I also wrote a working paper, which I called AI van repliek gediend, which is really like a legal term that you use in courts. And basically it means AI, the people talk back, something like this.
Nice, yeah.
So I did the research basically because I was motivated by some noises I heard coming from the States, in which I saw that people from the ground, like civil society organizations, communities, that they were actually able to really make a fist against some systems that they didn't like, some technical system that they didn't like to have around, such as facial recognition. So, for example, in Portland, so these communities, they were able actually to make a ban of this facial recognition system. So I was very much motivated to see, okay, so what can we do, or what are we doing here in the Netherlands? So I did do the research, and I spoke to a lot of civil society organizations, the more traditional ones, like feminist organizations, labor organizations, but also the broader human rights organizations, and after that also the digital privacy rights organizations, in order to see like whether there is awareness, whether there is pushback, and whether organizations are basically able or empowered to push back against harmful technologies.
I'm still kind of stuck on the 500 pages. How long did it take you to write a 500-page report?
The 500 pages report was like, it was a report that was basically requested from the government. Mm-hmm. So I think there was like 8 ministries that requested the WAR to advise them on AI.
Yeah, interesting. And in this work, you also bring up this idea of tegenmacht, counter power, I would say, or counter, how would you translate that?
Countervailing power.
Countervailing power,
Yeah, basically I see it as a democratic tool. Basically it's like, one power is consisting the other power. Yeah. And it's also about checks and balances in society. So, I think this is a very important tool that we have in society. And a lot of times we always think like, it should come from somewhere else. But I think we as a community, we live here in the Netherlands and we also have something to say. So we can also say, also use this pushback, use this countervailing power in order to ask for accountability for certain technologies that are being used in the Netherlands.
Yeah, because actually what we're saying is there's hardly any checks and balances. There is not, or?
So no, I didn't really say that. I do think there is some checks and balances, like we're living in this, now still democratic country. But I do think when you look at tech and the way that technologies are being deployed in the Netherlands, I always ask myself, like, how far is there a real representation of society? So who's making the decisions and who is being involved when these decisions are being made, or when these systems are being deployed? Because we have seen a lot of issues in the Netherlands, and it doesn't have to be AI. It can be like this simple algorithm, like what was used in the child benefit affair. It was just a simple algorithm, but we also saw like people asking for a visa that came from certain countries were putting on high risk list. We've seen Siri, maybe we talk about this a little bit later, but we see some surveillance on people with low income or migrant backgrounds. And I think that if you had included certain people within society, it might not have gotten this bad that these people were really harmed.
Yeah, exactly. I'd love to pick it up there with you, Gabrielle, because you've also done research on surveillance, right? And automated plate recognition systems and this idea of infrastructural surveillance. Can you explain a little bit more about that? And also,
I was
what's
so excited.
important to understand?
I was taking so many notes that I dropped my pen. Sorry for that. That's fantastic. I think we touched on so many important questions, right? So we're living in a world where surveillance, algorithmic surveillance, is increasingly everywhere, right? This involves governmental surveillance, how the government is surveilling people. And as you mentioned, I've been doing research on automated license plate recognition. It's the most boring form of surveillance I could find. And if you took a car when you were coming here, you were captured likely by an automated license plate recognition camera. Basically, people are calling it the facial recognition for cars, so you get what I mean. So it's everywhere, right? But there is very little debate around some of those technologies. There's a lot more debate about facial recognition than about license plate recognition. And I think that a key thing that we need to think about is how are we involving people, as you mentioned, in those debates, right? And I've been doing interviews as well with activists, but also with governments and other people who are working in this field. And I think one of the things that has come up at me is we need to be helping people ask better questions about those technologies. I think that's the critical consciousness that we need to raise. We need to get people to consider what do those technologies actually do. I think as a society, we are not being educated to fully comprehend what algorithmic surveillance is doing to our lives. And I think unless we do that, we cannot get to the level of thinking about refusal or counterpower, or as I called it as well, antagonism, right? How can we push back against those technologies? What we see nowadays is we're not being empowered enough, to use your words, to push back against those technologies in the way that I think is really important. And part of that is because, as you mentioned, those are infrastructural technologies, right? The license plate recognition camera on your street, you don't even notice it. Very often it's so transparent in our everyday life that we don't notice the many ways that we're being tracked and surveilled. And this is not just a question of privacy. I think this is what's really central to say is it's a question of justice. It's a question of, democracy, as some of you put it on the board. I think there's a set of questions.
Why do you say that? It's not a matter of privacy, it's a matter of justice?
Yeah, I think when we think about privacy, it tends to get into a question that a lot of people, some of you may be thinking, well, I have nothing to lose, I have nothing that I need to protect, and nothing to hide, so to say. And I think when we think about it as a question of justice, we get into more interesting questions, and we get to notice how important this is, to not be surveilled for all of us. And one example, just to explain this, is, activists have been targeted by surveillance. We have a long history of scholarship showing this, hundreds of years where activists have been targeted by surveillance once, the state gets to have that power. So if we forget about that, which is a question of justice, it's a question of democracy. It's not really a question of privacy. Understand what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, and it's like in the news right now again, right? Like how activists are being just like, police is knocking at your door.
Right.
Yeah.
And very often, once again, being as we are in Europe right now, it's easy. A lot of people I hear say, well, but we're not China or something like that, right? But this, I can point to many, many cases in Europe where activists have been targeted, and I bet you could as well. And so this is not a hypothetical scenario. So that's why it's really important for us to think about how we want to live with less surveillance.
Yeah, thank you for that. As a last question in this part of the conversation, you've been repeating it a couple of times about, some people are more affected than others by these systems of power. And we need to center the experience of those people, right, in the work that we do to resist, actually, or to push back. Can you say a little bit about that? Like how would that actually work, maybe, or how can doing that, how can centering those experiences help us to better respond and better understand what we're actually up against? you want to start, Naomi?
Sure. Yeah. I think for me there are two aspects of this. One is more epistemological in the sense of how do we even understand what is happening, right? And I think it's absolutely vital to center and to start the analysis with basically what you two already have been saying, also with those who are impacted by these systems, what actually happens, start in practice, start concretely. And it sounds so easy when I say it. And when you two say it, it's like, okay, obviously. But I think then you don't understand actually how radical it is, because 99% of the time, if questions like these are asked, the starting point is either the legal framework. Has the law been followed? Are all rights respected? Is due process respected? Or the question is a technological question. How does the system work? Is it working as it is supposed to work? And then within these very technical, jargony systems, at some point the actual question of experience completely dissipates, or is only allowed to exist within those frameworks. So actually starting with the people asking and seeing and understanding what the impact is, and then turning to the other frameworks is revolutionary in understanding how these systems work. And I think it's also vital to decide where we are going. Because again, if you start with the legal framework or with the technological systems, there is a very clear set path of what the future could look like or what the societies we're building towards. Right. And I think that's not sufficient. And if we want to look beyond that, the starting point can be social movements and how they respond to these systems. And then you can see the technological and the legal aspects of tools within or in
following
service
that
of
bigger
that.
why.
Yeah.
Monique, I see a lot of thoughts forming in your mind.
Yeah, so I was thinking about actually what Naomi's saying is like a lot of times like the problems that we have with technology, they are being maybe downplayed because we say like, oh, it's a technical problem. We need to make a solution for this technical problem. Maybe we make it more transparent, or maybe we have more feedback loop. But I think that when you look at all the issues that arise, it's actually it's social problems, because we do feed these systems with the way we have instructed our society. So it's basically a mirror of how our society is arranged, which we also see back and which is amplified in these technologies. So sometimes I think like I love regulations because I'm a lawyer, but I do think also it's very, very important to also step back from the technologies and maybe give some more attention on the power structures that we have in our societies.
Yeah. Good question, and we're almost at the Q&A, so good timing as well. Maybe Gabriel,
I wanted to bring the example of workers once again. So I have here the book Exchange with Turkers. It's available online. It seems that I'm a salesperson, right? I always bring a book. Sorry, I didn't realize
a book salesperson to be.
It's all of them are freely available online. So this one it's called Exchange with Turkers, and it is a project that we did, which for 2 weeks we made possible for people to go online and ask questions to the workers who train AI, or as we call it, the human intelligence behind the machines. And the idea is that they could ask any questions they wanted to the public. And this, because all of this, I guess the background is that, AI is being trained by humans. OpenAI can go up and say that it's not like that. Microsoft will say, try to get us not to see this, right? This gets to your question. All of those companies are fighting for us to think of AI as something that is magical, something that doesn't require any labor. And so when we're talking to those workers, which are called Turkers because they work in a platform called Amazon Mechanical Turk, you can read more of that in the introduction of the book. But the point is that we wanted to make this visible. We wanted to make those workers visible as people, not just as workers, but as people who have taste, who listen to music, who have desires, but also people who suffer all kinds of problems because of a platform that does not pay them what they're owed, that often doesn't pay them in time, that often doesn't pay for all of the work that they do. So in it, we had 5 workers respond, as I said, for 2 weeks through questions. And the book is a selection of their responses with other kinds of comments that they had after the process. But the entire point of it is I think this is a specific case of of people who are invisibilized in the production of the technology we use. And I think it's really essential to look into how we can make visible, once again, those infrastructures that power the technologies that we have today, and to find spaces for change. There is no reason why those workers are getting paid $2 an hour to tag our pictures, so to say.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, thank you. All right. So as I said, it's time for some questions from your side. There's already a couple of questions popping up from people at home as well. So I'm going to ask you to keep your answers concise so we can answer as many as possible. And maybe to start with one from the home front is a question to Gabrielle, whether you could tell something more about your research on the license plate recognition technology, and specifically how that is a problem in terms of justice.
Yeah, this is very dangerous because I'm writing a book about it, so I can spend 3 hours talking about it.
Please don't.
So you don't want that. No, absolutely. So license plate recognition is a very old technology, so it may seem a bit silly that we're talking about when we're talking about AI. But nowadays it's made more prevalent and bigger, so to say, because of AI. So it may seem like something that doesn't matter that much, but as I said, it's a kind of technology of surveillance that is everywhere in the roads. It's one of the largest surveillance infrastructures on Earth today. And it's essential for us to think about it in terms of justice in several different ways. I'll keep it to one. I've already mentioned one, which was the case of activists. I'll mention two more. The first is because of the errors of this technology, as I said. The errors those technologies cause, right? So it may seem very, very simple to identify a license plate on a vehicle as it is passing by, but I can tell you, it's not, right? And when we think of a technology that may have 99% of accuracy, that it writes down your license plate correctly, there's still 1% of the times that it gets it wrong. And if it identifies your vehicle with a different license plate than it was supposed to be, suddenly the police can stop your vehicle and think that it's a stolen vehicle, which may cause them to stop you with a gun to your head, as there are several cases, which I document in the book. And then the second case is similar to the activist case, is how this technology can be used for different things than the ones they were supposed to. So you mentioned the case of migration, and the Netherlands is really famous for implementing license plate recognition in its borders, even though it may not be fully legal. And importantly, in a way that is very targeted towards migration and people who are migrating, even if this may not be how it's supposed to be. And they keep this very open in a way that this technology could be used for a different reason in the future.
Yeah.
So that's why I think it's really scary.
Yeah. Thank you. All right. Some more questions from the room. Was your question already answered?
I forgot my question.
You forgot your question? Okay.
It was not answered.
Okay.
No,
Maybe we'll come back.
Are you looking at the right?
Wait, a microphone is coming your way.
Are you looking at the right level playing field? Because we use this thing for free every day. Like
phone,
junks,
you mean?
and then we complain that somebody else making advantage of it.
I don't really understand the question about the level playing field.
I mean, you're sharing your data with a US company. There is no European regulation. There's always a backdoor.
Right.
Always.
So what's your question?
Yeah, maybe it's more a point than a question.
My point is...
well, no, maybe it's more a point that you're making instead of a question.
My point is it not quite naive what we're telling each other?
Well, I don't know if it's a question. Maybe if anyone wants to respond super briefly, because I know there's a lot more questions
so super
here.
briefly, I do think it's very important that also in the European Union, in Europe, we try to make our own infrastructures. And so what we see, what is basically happening now, we are like this kind of regulating body. And definitely there are some states who are not really content with that and even try to downplay the regulations that we are making. But I do think the European Union, for example, can make a statement, can search for an own infrastructure. I think these things are possible. Instead of weakening our back and maybe even bowing our knees to some narratives coming from
Thanks for responding, Monique. I would love to also focus this discussion on this focus of citizen participation and how we can make that work. Faiza has a question in the back.
Yeah, thank you so much. That was really interesting. A lot of
We're not at the end
great
yet.
points. No, I know. So my worry is maybe that my question comes a bit too early. So if that's the case, just say so. But, so yes, citizen participation. Why citizen participation? I think that's clear, at least. I completely agree with you. And I really like, Naomi, what you were saying about the bottom up. And it's like, okay, what are the actual experiences of people who are subjected to these systems? But then, as you pointed out also, Monique, there are these people who have to choose who to invite and in what way to invite, and who decides who gets to choose who to invite. And so there, it seems that still a lot of the power resides with the actual developers behind these systems. And I was just curious to hear some of your thoughts how we can tackle those power relations already within deciding how to include citizens.
Yeah, I think I would love to include that in the second part of the conversation. Yeah, no, but it's I'm going to take it along. Thank you for that question. Okay, another question? Faiza, yeah?
Very quick, it just bounces back mostly on what you mentioned by the fact that AIs are trained on us, on humans. What happens when AI starts training on other AI, which can happen either more when than if?
Do you want to take that, Gabriel?
Yeah, very briefly. There's a really good question, right? So there's a lot of research right now. This is called synthetic data. So this idea that you can create data to train AI. So far, everything we have shows that this doesn't work that well, but it could in the future. I don't know. I'm not. I can't see the future. But I think what's really central and a key point of my research and other people's research is that no matter what, humans will be involved in creating AI or whatever kinds of algorithms we have. I think that's what's really central, is to never forget how humans are involved in creating technological systems. And it will continue to be so as long as we have technologies.
Yeah, thank you. Are there any burning questions for now for this part? Because indeed, the next part of the conversation is about the how. How are we going to organize? How are we going to involve citizens more? But any about this part that we had so far? You can wait? Okay. Mike is coming your way.
So it's really about citizen participation. So my name is Dr. Linda Bongabuna. I work in the pharmaceutical industry. I'm a doctor in pharmaceutical science. I have a master's in regulation as well, and I work as a regulatory scientist in the pharmaceutical industry. And I am a writer in decolonizing science. So I'm really in terms of an intersection where I am included in designing a solution. And when it comes to AI, because in my company and also in the pharma industry, that's really the buzzwords right now. And one of the points that I have, it doesn't mean because we are an include that we really have a voice.
Right.
Yeah. I'm going through a lot of frustration, and especially when we look at the ethics of AI. So basically, the way the pharma industry is really approaching it, it's a lot about in the way that we approach developing medicines in the 19th century. It's a great innovation. Let's look at it and really look at regulation and ethics to the people who are responsible for it. And in this case, it's me.
Yeah.
So it's not really just about including, but really about changing mindset and having people within those organizations who are able to work with different realities, bearing in mind that Western science is very binary.
Sure.
So we have those people who are extremely into binary logic. And when we work with diversity and inclusion, we need a multidimensional logic.
Yeah.
And from a human development, it's still not there.
Yeah. It's like we have a fourth speaker in the room, actually. And I think your point is very loud and clear, that just because you're included doesn't mean your voice is heard and taken along. I would love to hold on to your questions if they're still relevant after the next part of our conversation, but we have quite a bit more to cover. So I would love to take us to the next, because indeed, like, we know why. How then? How can citizens be involved? And we have another similar Menti question prepared for you. So if you go to menti.com again and use the code 41023308, another question of how you think that citizens can get involved in shaping the deployment, the use, the future of AI. Curious to see your responses.
Wow. Almost impossible.
Almost impossible.
I love it.
It's not impossible.
This is a good crowd. Like it.
I like the boycott.
Yeah, me too.
Boycott, yeah.
Protest.
Open source. Testing.
This is trippy to keep looking at it. Education.
Yeah, education. A big word.
Education is definitely a big one. Advocacy.
Start programming.
Grassroots initiatives, determining the needs. That comes back a couple of times.
We are already involved. That one's nice.
Yeah. Surveying.
Contestability.
Yeah. Okay, citizen forums. Make it a mandatory subject at school, so that's indeed education, but very specific. Yeah. Interesting. Thank you for all of that input, all your ideas. I would love for us to make this come to life with a couple of examples as well from our speakers on indeed how to involve citizens. For instance, Monique, a couple of years ago, there was this issue with Siri. You already mentioned it in the first part, the system associated with discriminatory surveillance. Can you tell us a little bit about this case and especially what we learned from it in terms of how to contest these systems?
Yeah, so this system called Siri, it was put into certain neighborhoods. It was used by a ministry. And basically what happened was it was a risk indication system. So from various governmental database, it would take information on people living in certain areas, basically on their housing history, on their using benefits history, on their tax history, on their working history. And it was combining all this information, and then they fed it to this algorithm, kind of secret algorithm, who was then calculating whether these people would maybe in the future, in the next 5 years, commit fraud. So these people didn't do anything, but they were spied upon by this system. And then basically the people themselves started feeling like something's wrong because they were getting all these visits from public servants. And then basically they reached out. There were a couple of organizations that got involved. And one of the organizations was an organization that I was also a part of, which is called the NJCM. We had a project in there which was called PILP, which helped in public interest litigation, and together with a bunch of other in a coalition with other civil society organizations, but also one of the big labor organizations. We went to court. And we won the court case because basically it was said that this system was interfering in the privacy of these people, and also had the notion, or it could really discriminate people because it was actually put into some areas where for the biggest part people with low incomes would live, and people with migrant backgrounds. So and this is, I think, this was very powerful because we formed a coalition with all other organizations, and that helped to go to court and also to make this case. And we didn't even only went to court to win the case, and luckily we won it, but it also gave a lot of rumor. So people started noting like these kind of things are going on, and which I think is also a very powerful tool.
Yeah, exactly. And do you indeed think that because you were a coalition that it was so successful both in creating like I do think that creating this rumor with various organizations, and even also this big labor organization who doesn't do a lot on tech. So I think one of the takeaways from that was like there was organizations included that had nothing to do with tech, that know nothing about tech, and still it was able to won this case for these people by combining the powers, combining each other's knowledge, and spreading the word that this was happening. Yeah, so interesting. Naomi, you also have this very important example of, a court case actually. And the context is that sometimes as a citizen you can feel helpless if you face discrimination because of these oppressive systems or these kind of black box systems. And you've worked on this case with Robin, who's also here in the you already pointed her out. Hey, Robin Pokorny, who sued the VU, Vrije Universiteit. Can you tell us a little bit more about the case and what we learned from that on how you can defend yourself as a citizen?
Yeah, so it feels very strange actually to
exactly.
be sitting
She's sitting right there. We can also have Robin come up and explain it.
No. Okay, so this was one of the news articles with Robin and Hans, and so the basic story is that it's about exam surveillance software that students such as Robin used during the pandemic to be able to take their exams at home. And one phase of that software was to scan your room to make sure that you're alone, and to scan your face to make sure that you're just one person. And when Robin had to go through that several times for several exams, every single time the scan didn't work because insufficient lighting. And mind you, that was not when scanning the room, only when scanning her face. And for the people who are not in the room here, Robin is a black woman. So as someone skilled in technology, computer science, and an activist, at some point the center and Robin came into contact, and she was very adamant that she wanted to fight this, and we figured that the best route to do this was a human rights violation complaint procedure, or discrimination by these systems. And our setup, really the aim was to prove legally that these type of systems can discriminate, because we can all feel and think that it is a form of racism or discrimination, but that is something very different than the legal standard, and it's its own world and its own definition. And we wanted to ensure that there is some tangible case law that says black and white, this legal standard is met, this is not okay to discriminate in this way. And for a large part, we did that. So there were two parts to the complaints procedure. And the first part, they were very clear of, yes, this legal standard applies to this context. And that was important for us because it was the first time in the Netherlands that it was phrased that way. So we were able to generate a lot of media attention about it. And do a lot of media and just to really put this on the agenda. But then in the final ruling, we did eventually lose the case. But the way in which we lost it, I think, is incredibly interesting and tells me how far we still have to go.
How is it even possible to lose? Because it's so obvious.
Yeah, no, what they said was, okay, there is a lot of I'm paraphrasing here. There are a lot of indications that this system is indeed discriminatory, is indeed racist. But in these two specific exams that this specific student took on this specific day, there's just no actual super clear indication that she at that specific moment was discriminated, which is wild.
Yeah.
But it also shows us the limits of the legal standards that we have and what we need to do. And for me personally, I think one of the main takeaways is, okay, if you're looking at these systems, it's almost impossible to prove discrimination in an individual case because of the technical setup, because of it's basically a statistical thing also. And you can't prove that that statistical instance happened in your specific case in most situations. So for me, the lesson was also we should have gone the route that you explained earlier and do a collective case, a collective complaint. So that is a main takeaway, that if people run into these issues as an individual, it's incredibly difficult. But if you find organizations, if you find other people, then there are tools that are a lot more useful.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
Can I add one more thing?
Of course you can.
Because that's just a petty thing. Because we did win one part of the case, which is that the university had insufficient complaint procedures. So that
they really do.
Yeah, the Human Rights Institute was like, okay, so you really need to fix these procedures, because the way it's set up now, people just cannot complain about discrimination, and that in and of itself is a violation of human rights.
Okay, yeah, that is something.
And then, and this is where the petty part comes in, we actually got a letter from the president of the university, and again I'm paraphrasing, saying, yeah, so this ruling by the court or the Institute for Human Rights, so we thought about it and we really don't think we're racist. So we don't think if we're not racist, our procedures cannot be racist. So we're not going to change anything, and we're not going to implement the
but
verdict.
It's court ordered, though.
Yeah, no. So that's the thing. It's a complaint procedure. It's not court. So it's like authoritative. But no, if you feel that if you really feel that you're not
in your
racist,
heart that you are not racist. Yeah.
So the feels that.
Wow. Wow. We have a long way to go. Yeah. So indeed, like court has limitations, right? Gabrielle, you also work with artists in kind of more the underlying, like how can we shape these, as it says here, like algorithmic imaginaries, like as in what do we want to see, right? How do we want to shape technology and AI? And can you say a little bit about like how art can really like tangibly support us all in exploring that?
Yeah, for sure. So I think when I'm talking about arts, I'm also thinking about activism. I'm thinking about creative people in general who are trying to do two different things. And I think that gets to the question you brought, our colleague here in the front. I think the first thing is defamiliarizing those systems, making them visible. So we talked about facial recognition. I think you did that in your project, which was a law case. But in our case, what artists are trying to do is they're trying to make facial recognition systems, for example, visible in things that we can understand and things that we can fight back against in the end. So I'm thinking of one specific case here, as I say this, that you reminded me of, which is this Brazilian artist. I'm from Brazil, by the way, so some examples I bring are because of that, who is called Gudase. And his project was, he was the first person to do a Freedom of Information Act request to get his facial recognition pictures that the buses in his city were taking of people. So the buses were using facial recognition, and he was the first person to get those pictures of him and use it to make a film. Right, and when you watch that film, you can really see how facial recognition is taking pictures of you. That is an artistic project, right? And it really gets to that. And then the second point is gets to the question is about this idea of imagining alternatives. I think artists can really push us to try to imagine how, for example, our infrastructures could be different. Many of you had open source on the screen, which is one way of thinking about this. But I think there are also ideas around, for example, having smaller AI. What would that look like, for example? So there's several artists nowadays thinking about how could we use AI that actually doesn't try to be a huge thing in a data center and so on, but actually something that you can run, on your tiny little computer. Could that be possible? So you don't, spend all of the water, cooling the OpenAI data centers and all of the problems that causes for the environment. Instead, could you run that in a smaller way? But that involves changing, once again, as I mentioned before, our values and assumptions that drive the way that we create those tools.
Yeah. Nice. So we are saying, indeed, the legal, tools that we have are interesting to an extent. Getting the media involved, so awareness of what's actually happening. Art, indeed, as you just described, educating people in that way as well. But can we just list a couple more ways? Like, if we want to get involved, what are some of the avenues?
I think one very concrete thing, because we're all very dependent on these these tools, these softwares, but there are alternatives out there, and to make an effort and not only find an alternative for your Microsoft Teams, use Jitsi or that type of stuff. There's just tons and tons of resources out there, but not only just being like, okay, I have to use something else, but I think it's also really important to understand why, that it's really not just an abstract thing of corporate power and monopolies are bad, but to really understand how little value human life has to these companies. It's not just, capitalism bad, it's the bad stuff is happening. And one of the resources I think is useful for this is a collective of No Tech for Apartheid, who has been documenting very meticulously and very clearly the different ways in which the big tech companies, like specifically Microsoft, Amazon, Google, have been facilitating the IDF and the apartheid regimes there. And it's just a really good resource to understand what is happening beyond being just like, big corporations are bad in a general sense, but to really feel a bit why it's important to wherever we can, because it's very difficult. All our workplaces are completely dependent on it, to where we can try and push for it.
Yeah. Educate yourself.
I wanted to add, I think this is really important. You are here today. I want to thank you for being here today. I think it's really important to understand that this is not something that only computer scientists can do or only lawyers can do, but that everyone can be part of. And that's why in the book. No, I had to do it. In the book, Resisting Data Colonialism, we have 10 ways to resist data colonialism, which we as a network of a bunch of people came up with. I'm not saying this is enough. I just want to point that this is a start, And it goes from the question, once again, of fighting for justice for the workers that make the data economy, but it also goes through promoting alternative forms of data governance, the way that we organize and hold our data. Some of those things are quite big, and we have to join together into collectives and groups, be it in activism, be it collective action, be it whatever it is. But I think it also gets back to our individual actions and the ways that we find to, in small actions, antagonize or resist, data colonialism or AI in general.
Such as small action, like?
Yeah, I think it can be as small as, for example, what I mentioned about how we use AI. Very often we use, big AI to do small tasks. So that's something that I've been thinking about. Do we really need, to use the OpenAI systems when you can actually install an LLM in your computer? And even on small computers, install an LLM, a large language model, and run small queries on that. I'm not saying this is like the best thing that is going to solve everything we have, but the energy impact of this is different. Could that change the ways we use AI? It's of course a much more complicated debate, but this is just one of the things. It also goes through which technologies we buy, and you mentioned some companies which are complicit in certain forms of harms and injustices. I think that's a different take.
And Monique, you're also concretely supporting communities resisting digital oppression For instance, through your work on the board of Digital Freedom Fund. This idea of weaving liberation. I mean, it's kind of an interesting thought, right? Like, how can we weave together all these different actions to liberate ourselves? Can you say a little bit more about that?
Yes, so I'm the co-chair of the Digital Freedom Fund. There's another chair member here in the room. It's really nice to have you here. And we work with an excellent team on the Digital Freedom Fund. And basically what we do is we help litigators and activists with grants to go to courts, so to do public interest litigation. We also help them with knowledge, with forming community, sharing good practices, and basically supporting certain groups that have the ability or have a case in order to go to court. So this is what we do with the Digital Freedom Fund. For example, I have a very recent example because we have the Dutch, I think his name is Danny Mekic. And basically what Danny did is he found out that he was being shadowed or... Shadowbanned, from Twitter, X. And he found out because some of his friends were saying like, hey, you don't post anymore. And he was like, yeah, I post every day. But then again, Twitter or X was not so happy about the critical content that he was posting. So they shadow banned him. And actually, when you do that, you have to inform the person that you are shadow banning. And they didn't do that. So he went to court in the Netherlands. And actually, he did won this court case. But then Twitter, of course, went into appeal, which is going on now. And what they also did is they started a lawsuit against him, which is kind of disgusting. But so now we are talking with Danny and see how we can help him in forming his argument and supporting him in these court cases. And so with Weaving Liberation is actually hosted at this moment still with the Digital Freedom Fund. And it's actually the part of the decolonization part that Nanny Jansen started when she created the Digital Freedom Fund. And Weaving Liberation is taking up this part in Europe, working with various organizations like feminist organizations, environmental organizations, all kinds of organizations, anti-race organizations, collaborating, getting together, and also, how you say it, working on these resilient ways of educating and being into this digital space where they haven't been for a long time.
Interesting, super, important, right? The intersectionality of the work.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, before we take a couple of last questions from you all, just a last question to you, Naomi, because a bit of a positive note of like tech and also AI can be used as a tool in itself, right, for activism. And maybe you can just briefly share an example with us, like we can be like, hey, that's the other side of it, maybe. Oops.
I think it's in whatever type of activism you want to engage in these days, you have to reckon with technology and how you use it or how it's being used on you. And in both senses, it's just absolutely vital to understand the vulnerabilities and the options there. And I think when we were discussing this before, for me, most clearly has been the past at the University of Amsterdam, also the organizing around the BDS movement at the university, that for a lot of people it was the first time coming into contact with this type of activism and really having to reckon with, I cannot do this on my employer's infrastructure. I have to use other apps. I have to use other forms of communication. I have to switch to Signal, etc., etc. But also towards if you are engaged in any type of activism or a protest, it can be absolutely vital to do use a face covering. And that has always already been an inherent vital part of the right to protest. It's not, I think it's so demonized in media of being like, oh, you have something to hide, or oh, these villainous, suspicious people with face coverings. But no, it's always been an integral part of your right to protest, of your freedom of expression. And that's because the police and the state has always been a dangerous actor. But now more than ever with facial recognition, it can be absolutely vital. So it's perhaps not an complete answer to your question, but this is the things I was thinking about.
Yeah. Okay, let's open the floor to the questions here. We have a question in the back.
Hi. I'm gonna stand.
Hi.
Thank you so much for your thoughts and your time and your insights. It's been very encouraging to hear you speak. I have perhaps maybe a hot take and a question for the room. Is just making note. It's a Monday evening. We're in a room full of highly educated, mostly white, privileged people speaking about how to incite justice in technology and data. Even speaking with the vocabulary that we're using here, decolonization, a lot of people who this is impacting the most are probably working, don't speak English, and don't know anything. I mean, there's a lack of literacy in this topic.
Yeah.
How would you suggest that we provide a platform and or meet people where they're at so that we can actually involve them in true justice in combating this issue?
Important question. Monique?
Yeah, I definitely would like to answer that question. So last year, I think there are some initiatives going on, and I spoke earlier about the research that I did when working at the Scientific Council for Government Policy. I was a little bit afraid that this extensive report, as you call it, would end up in the drawer of a minister. And I thought, like, you know what? I did the research to see what's happening in civil society and with various communities. So let me take it up myself. And that's what I did with Connect Me at Human Rights and Technology. And basically what I'm trying to do, or what we are trying to do, is forming a platform for various communities in the Netherlands and also civil society to get together and to basically help these organizations how to get involved in this space and how their voice can be heard. So, for example, we organized a series of what we call the People versus AI. We did a first one last year in May, and we thought it was very successful because we had like all these people there. We had like a neighborhood feminist who came. We had like the Goede Zaak. We had like even the National Institute for Human Rights was there. Amnesty was there, and all other people who are interested. And we got together and we opened up the floor. We had speakers with various backgrounds, which you also normally don't see a lot on this issue. And we got into breakout rooms and we talked about like what kind of risk could it mean for the people that you are serving, or your group or your community. And that was very, I loved it. I love it. So we are going to do another one. But basically it is to get people involved, people that really think like, oh, tech is not my thing. Oh, this is scary. And also I think the demystification of it is very important, because there's a lot of tech companies that want us to think that it's really difficult and it's not to be grasped by normal people. But we really want to open up the floor and get all kinds of people involved, because we do think that the knowledge is there and also the power is there in order to make a pushback or a fist.
Yeah, and have the right kind of intermediaries in the room that can serve communities in their networks. I would say,
yes, definitely.
Nice, thank you. I mean, great that there is an answer to this big question.
Yeah, sorry. And then one last thing that I do want to mention, because also with Connect Me at Human Rights and Technology, is we also started a talk show in which we talk to women of color on this tech issue, and the goal is to show that also when you're a black woman, that tech is also something about you, and that you also have something to say about it. So I'm very, really, happy about those things.
I would love to take one last question from this side of the room, because I feel we've neglected you a little bit. Yeah.
Yes, first of all, thanks for the talk. It was very inspiring. Thank you. Maybe it's more related to the first half, but I was also thinking, like, for example, like Naomi, you had talking about like certain questions we should ask, like is it technological, is it legal? But should we also not ask, like, was there an alternative? Like, for example, also with the examination, like, was there an alternative? Could you do it in another way? And can we not enforce it in some kind of way that every company, every situation, there has to be an alternative? Like, we're kind of thrown in this digital world. We are enforced to be involved. Should we not kind of require for always an alternative?
Yeah, I love this question, because this was one of our main struggles, right? Because, I mean, none of us wanted this surveillance software to begin, like to exist in this world. So then you start a case, and that is very one-dimensional, right? Because it's only focusing on the equal treatment and non-discrimination part. And then you try to organize as much media attention for that to drive that point home that, oh, these technologies are not neutral. They can be racist. They can be problematic. But then that was one of the biggest struggles of this. The language of this case, of this legal construct does not allow us to also say, hey, but actually we don't want this to exist at all, because it's wildly problematic, even if it would work. Because if you start saying, oh, this tech is racist, then you open the door for being like, oh, but what if we racism it? Would it then be great? And 99% of the time the answer is no.
Maybe I can, as a final questioner, kind of weave it in here from at home. Was also this question of, how can we make sure that advocacy this doesn't become a side conversation, and rather ensure that democratic values scale at the same speed as AI in this changing world? Maybe as a last little reflection, how can we make sure that these democratic values also grow? I mean, we can talk about this for an hour and a half about this question alone.
I think we focus a lot on individual things we can do, and I think in the end, my point would be connecting also to what's underlying your points a lot, is that we have to organize more, and political organizing, and not necessarily focused on tech, but where tech is a necessary part, because it's a necessary part of this world.
Yeah.
I wanted to add, I think your question was fantastic. I think when you ask about those alternatives, you point to this general feeling that the way we have technology today is inevitable. There's no way around it. And let's all agree here, it's not. We can change the way it is. There's no reason why it has to be the way it is right now. And in my research field, the big motto is, it could have always been otherwise. Technology could have always been otherwise. And it's up to us to create what is this otherwise. When we think about surveillance, once again, the case of license plate recognition, it was created this way because of the history of how it was created, the history of surveillance, the history of how surveillance has been used to attack activists, and all of this. So there is no reason why we need to do it the way it is, and we can always think otherwise. If we stay just thinking about the law, and I'm next to two great lawyers, if we stay just thinking about the law as it is, we are going to fail. Right? We need to think about alternative systems. We need to think about alternative systems of accountability. We need to think about how we can build better critical consciousness about those systems.
Yeah.
That's also part of this fight. And it's up to all of us.
Technology for all, indeed. Thank you so much. We're slowly coming to the end of this conversation. Are there any burning last thoughts that you want to add, Monique, or you agree with what
I would like to point out, I think there's this organization, it's called Dreaming Beyond AI. And I would just check it out on the internet.
Dreaming Beyond AI,
nice. Because I do think there's not a technology coming, but we need to dream about it, and we need to create it in the way that we want it, and not like 5 companies think that we should have our technology.
It's a great
Thank
name.
you. Paulina, can I ask you back here and give a warm applause for this round of conversation? Just super brief, Paulina. You've been listening, taking notes, integrating. What is your key takeaway from today?
Yeah, so I would say for me personally, there were two key takeaways. The first one would be this really central distinction between justice and privacy. So as soon as information is collected about you, it becomes political. So it's not a private thing anymore. And I think my second takeaway would be that there's so much strength in collaboration. So collaboration between different organizations, collaborations with the tech workers who do the labeling, which can be really traumatizing, and collaboration with artists. So just for people to come together and to see, okay, how can we, put strength into this by just working together, I would say.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, thank you, Paulina. And thank you all also for being here, and thank you for this conversation. I feel we really covered a lot of ground actually together. And if I summarize it, normally I would ask ChatGPT to do this, but I'll think again next time. But this, I think it's important because we, this whole conversation was indeed meant to empower us collectively, and we spoke about the why, and we kind of had a feeling why we need to talk about this, but it really came to life because, the AI as it organized now, it feeds forms of oppression. It's colonial, it's exploitative, and we need to challenge that. We can challenge that, and we need to challenge that. Also because the space for resistance for challenging it is shrinking, because there's a lack of accountability, because decision-making is everything but inclusive, because we're being watched all the time, and that is indeed a justice issue. So there's enough reasons to really wake up and say, hey, how can we resist this? And to talk about that and this part of resistance, and, this simply people talking back, as you put it. You spoke about the courts as an important, sometimes limited, but important way of resisting. We spoke about the media and awareness and education and getting the stories out there. We spoke about making effects visible, for instance, through art, and also using art as a space to kind of think freely again. We spoke about our individual choices. What do we want to use this for, actually? About protesting, about political organizing, and this very important point that was raised about centering experiences of people that are being harmed and how to actually do that in a significant way and in a meaningful way. So bring it to where it needs to be, this conversation. So thank you so much to our speakers, to all of you.
Better than AI.
Thank you. Still need for... The human brain is still useful in this world. Thank you also everyone at home for being with us and asking interesting questions. The next program in this series is already coming up in this Designing Technology for All series. It's titled AI and Human Creativity. Important, interesting, on the 12th of May. Check out our website. You can reserve your spot already. You can, of course, also stay in touch with us every other program at dezwijger.nl. And as you know, all the programs here at home in Pakhuis de Zwijger are for free. We want to keep it that way, and we can use support to do that. Become a friend of Pakhuis de Zwijger if you feel that's an important civic space to have. Of course, there's drinks at the bar. We can speak more to our speakers and to ourselves here. Thank you so much for being here, and have a good night.
My privacy colleagues will not be happy about my take on it.